Today the committee is taking evidence again on the appointment of former UK ambassador to the US, Lord Mandelson, and I wondered if our witnesses could introduce themselves for the record.
I'm Chris Wormald, I'm Cabinet Secretary.
Oliver Robbins, Permanent Undersecretary at the FCDO.
Thank you very much for coming, both of you. I wondered if it was just fair, just to people just tuning in, let's just put this in context. As Sir Ollie, when it came to the appointment of Lord Mandelson, you commissioned the vetting and were Lord Mandelson's line manager. And Sir Chris, you were responsible for the due diligence. The Prime Minister appointed Lord Mandelson, and I think everyone has agreed that the system for direct ministerial appointments is inadequate, and it's been changed. So I'd like to take this in a logical order, and I'd like to start with questions in relation to the vetting process and then go to due diligence, and I will come back and ask some questions about the open source and due diligence, if that's all right. And then at the end, I think we have a suggestion as to how the process could be improved. Fleur.
Yeah, sorry, just before, so just for absolute clarity, I was appointed Cabinet Secretary on the 16th of December, and Lord Mandelson was appointed on the 18th of December. So the processes we're going to describe mainly happen under my predecessor, Simon Case, and then I'm there right at the end. But I will answer across the entire period. And just while I have the floor, and I'm sure everyone takes the same view, obviously anything relating to this issue and Mr. Epstein, our first thoughts are for the victims, and I know the committee would share that view.
Certainly. We did, when arranging these hearings, we did ask for someone who could come and answer our questions, and we made clear the sort of questions that we wanted to ask, and obviously you were chosen as being the appropriate person to answer. We actually suggested Darren Tierney, who was the former head of propriety and ethics, who ran the process, but I think it was thought that it was better that you came.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and we'd agree with you as a committee that our thoughts are with the Epstein victims in all of this as the background. So Ollie, first of all, could you set out the normal process the FCDO uses to appoint an ambassador?
Of course. So what we would normally do is advertise the job across the diplomatic service. Often, don't invariably open to the wider civil service for appropriately qualified candidates. There would then be a standard-looking civil service panel interview. For our most senior jobs, we often involve external people in that interview process. And then through internal governance, ultimately, I take responsibility for a recommendation to the Foreign Secretary as the most appropriately qualified person, or occasionally people, for the job. And she, of course, then makes that recommendation herself to the King. And she's perfectly entitled to query my recommendation and ask questions about it.
So when in that process does the security vetting take place normally?
So in that standard process I've described to you, Ms Anderson, we are normally dealing with people who already enjoy the required level of security clearance. So for people, UK-based staff within the Foreign Office, from whom the vast majority of our ambassadors and high commissioners are drawn, they will already hold developed vetting clearance.
So for Lord Mandelson's appointment, was it the same situation? He already had the security clearance and so didn't need to be vetted? And was there any difference from the normal process for his appointment?
It was different because this was not run as a standard service/diplomatic service process. As the committee will probably be aware, there is specific exemption within the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act 2010 for heads of mission appointments from time to time to be appointed directly by ministers. This is known as political appointments, though they don't actually have to be politicians or even politically motivated. It's just the choice of politicians. And Lord Mandelson's appointment, as one or two others over the years have fallen into that category. To answer the other part of your question, he did not hold national security vetting when he was appointed. But as is normally the case with external appointments to my department and the wider civil service, the appointment was made subject to obtaining security clearance.
Yeah,
Can I just ask, just because you said some other examples, do you mind just giving some other examples of political appointments to ambassadorial roles?
Yes, the only two from recent history, Chair, are Ed Llewellyn, Lord Llewellyn, who was originally appointed to Paris and then subsequently Rome when David Cameron was Prime Minister. George Hollingbury, Sir George Hollingbury, who was appointed as ambassador in Havana when Theresa May was Prime Minister, I think, although actually I have to double check who was Prime Minister at the time, but under the last party in power. Going back further, and I think you alluded to this in the House of Commons when you spoke on it recently, Chair, we've had Lord Boateng in Pretoria, we've had Baroness Liddell in Canberra. So
Valerie Amos.
Valerie Amos, Baroness Amos. So there's no set pattern, as you know, but the sort of we seem to be in a kind of rhythm where there are one or two per Parliament, and there's obviously no specific provision for that number or volume in the legislation, but they're not terribly frequent, but they're not unheard of.
Just in relation to this point, in the two recent examples that you gave, was the vetting clearance process completed before or after those appointments were announced?
So the issue, I think, did not arise in the case of Lord Llewellyn in that he enjoyed developed vetting status as Chief of Staff and a temporary civil servant. I would have to double check with Sir George Hollingbury. My educated guess is that it would have been a very similar process to the one we follow with Lord Mandelson, i.e. that an appointment was made subject to the achievement of vetting clearance.
About that.
Yeah, and if I can add, it may be helpful. When we're making appointments from outside the civil service, which happens obviously a lot more regularly than it does for ambassadors, the normal thing is for the security clearance to happen after appointment, but before the person signs a contract and takes up post. So if we're recruiting a permanent secretary or similar from outside the civil service, that's normally what would happen. The security clearance process would happen after the announcement of the appointment, but before the person takes up post, and the appointment would be subject to the security clearance being granted. Just while we're talking about differences, although the processes for ambassadors are similar for civil servants, they are actually different in one other regard, just so I've said it. Ambassador appointment, again under the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, are outside the ambit of the Civil Service Commission. So that's the only other difference in the appointment process, and again that is set out specifically in the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act.
The question that could be asked in the panel interviews and that would be asked in the vetting would be, is there anything that you know of in your background that would bring the government into disrepute? Would that be asked in the panel, the interview panel that's asked, or would that be saved for the vetting or the due diligence process?
So in the panel we run for external applications to the diplomatic service, we normally do offer an opportunity to the candidate to explain any further issues they want to make the panel aware of, and it would normally also be something we'd follow up if we wanted to make an offer to a we'd offer another opportunity to disclose anything at that point as well. So yes.
That offer was there. In the letter to Simon Hoare, the cabinet...
Hang on, so was it asked? Sorry,
Ms Anderson's question was specifically about what normal practice would be.
Okay, so in the interview for Lord Mandelson, was he given this opportunity? Could you tell us anything that would bring the government to dispute, or that differently worded?
Now, this is where the process that Sir Oliver describes is different. So there was no interview for Mr Mandelson. It was done as a direct appointment by ministers, as Sir Oliver has described, and therefore there was no panel interview. That was the normal practice for direct ministerial appointments, whether they were ambassadorships or other direct ministerial appointments, for example, to the Home Civil Service or direct advisors. And in the in the letter that I sent PACAC and copied to this committee. That area is one of the changes that we are making to the direct ministerial appointment process, so that we effectively replicate what would normally happen in a panel interview for direct ministerial appointments, where there is a minuted conversation with the candidate in which the same questions you would normally ask in a panel interview about conflict of interest, about anything that the candidate wishes to raise that might bring the government into disrepute, etc., are replicated in a direct ministerial appointment system, and that's one of the changes we have made to the process since Lord Mandelson was appointed.
Right.
Okay, so for this appointment specifically, Sir Ollie, the Cabinet Secretary said that a thorough process to understand and consider Lord Mandelson's private interest was carried out as part of the usual ambassadorial appointment process. So therefore there wasn't a panel interview. So who carried out that assessment, and did they decide any mitigations were required to prevent any conflicts of interest having had that assessment?
An external appointee to the senior reaches of the service will always be asked to fill in a conflict of interest form. Very happy to share a copy of that standard form with the committee if it would help. It's an opportunity for the candidate to set out the issues that they think that might actually raise or potentially raise or perceived as raising a conflict of interest. That process was completed in Lord Mandelson's case, and his appointment was subject to him performing that process, going through that process with us. The way in which we then discuss with him any of those perceived conflicts obviously is a confidential matter between him and us, but the process was followed rigorously.
You say us? Who?
We'll leave that there. That was Oliver Robbins, I should say, Permanent Undersecretary to the Foreign.
Was it you? Who did it?
There were. He submitted his form. Yep. That was assessed in the usual way, and I did indeed have a conversation with him before he took up his appointment.
And for that,
can I just bring Sir John just for a moment?
Just quickly on the question of avoiding conflicts of interest, why was he not asked to relinquish his shareholding in Global Counsel?
This was honestly the hardest bit of this bit of the process for both of us, because Lord Mandelson was a founder of the company. It's a private company without traded stock, and so whilst he was confident that he could conduct his role as ambassador without giving rise to a conflict, we wanted to make sure we mitigated that possibility in some particular ways. So I did put in place some measures to do that with him, which we added to actually as time went on, because as he then tried to find ways out of the shareholding, which he was actively trying to do with Global Counsel, we were able then to put in place an extra guarantee that he was not in fact going to be benefiting from any upside in those shares as his employment with us continued.
I mean, did the mitigations include ensuring that he was unaware of particular clients, Global Counsel, or work being undertaken?
Yes.
So how did that work?
We managed this through his office in Washington and with advice from my HR department.
Can I ask one other question about conflicts of interest? I mean, you've talked about financial conflicts of interest. Is there room on the form for putting in conflicts of interest in relation to friendships?
No, it's not a sort of reputational conflict that's being targeted by that form chair. It's about reality or perceptions of economic and financial conflicts.
Okay. Sorry for that.
Sorry, conflict of interest slightly more broadly than economic. For instance, if Lord Mandelson had been a trustee of a prominent environmental charity and had been working on pursuing Britain's environmental agenda in Washington, he would have declared that to us as well.
And a final question on that part of the process. So before you had that interview, would it be one in which it was up to Lord Mandelson to declare anything, or would you go to that interview having done some work on what was in the public domain and to question him about?
On conflicts of interest
Yes.
specifically?
Yeah.
No, the process depends on the candidate disclosing themselves things that they think are of potential or actual risk. Obviously, if he had not raised his shareholding in Global Counsel, I would have queried that because I was well aware of it. But there isn't a sort of proactive duty on the employer to seek evidence and intelligence to put to the candidate. This is a process that depends upon the candidate having a shared interest with the department in managing and avoiding conflicts.
Niles, I think that Afra's got another question.
As long as I'm not interrupting you. Thank you. During this conversation that you had with him, were you aware at that time that in his previous roles he'd been sacked as Trade and Industry Secretary in 1998 for failing to declare an interest-free loan that he'd received from someone whose businesses were being investigated by the department at the time, that he'd been sacked in 2001 after attempting to broker a British passport for a wealthy donor to the Millennium Dome project with which he was involved, and that he'd been criticised on numerous occasions as the European Trade Commissioner for accepting hospitality from companies on whose commercial interests he was in the process of ruling? And did any of those come up in the telephone conversation you had with him?
I knew Lord Mandelson's CV, and
not what you usually put on your CV, I would imagine.
and if I may, while I want to make sure with this committee that we don't give Lord Mandelson any preferential treatment versus any other FCDO employee, I do also have a duty of care to him and confidentiality towards him, which means I don't want to treat him any worse than any other FCDO employee. So I think the substance of the conversation between him and me around his conflicts of interest needs to be between us. I was well aware of his background. I was well aware of the issues that you described from previously in his career. As I've answered Ms. Anderson, the process depends upon Lord Mandelson and others in his position being open with us about the things that they fear could draw his employment into conflict of interest disrepute. And I'm confident that we were thorough about that from a conflict of interest point of view.
Chair?
Yes, go.
To link up the 2 points that have been made by Fleur and Afra, you have a system based upon self-declaration and you're dealing with somebody with a track record of not declaring. So I think when Fleur makes the point, do you do any, in that situation, faced with somebody with a track record of not being 100% transparent on their conflicts of interest, is there not a duty of responsibility that you have to the department to ensure that you are informed, that you do that research beforehand to make sure that if they haven't declared anything, you are aware of it beforehand?
I understand your question, and it's an important question. We had to, I think we do have a responsibility to treat candidates for these roles in a sort of fair and balanced way across the people that we see. And whilst I said in answer to Ms. Brandreth's question, I didn't try and hermetically seal off from the rest of my mind the knowledge I had and the department had about Lord Mandelson's career and background. The system across the board is a self-declaration system on conflicts of interest. And so we thought it proper to run the same system for Lord Mandelson as we would for any other potential employee.
The point is that he wasn't a candidate. So you say, we want to treat him fairly as we would do any other candidate. But he wasn't a candidate, he was an appointee. And that does make things different, doesn't it?
Excuse me, appointee. But if we're bringing in, we have brought other people in, even in my time here, in senior roles from outside, and we have conducted the conflict of interest process at exactly the same point in the process.
The foundation of it seems to be they have a form to fill in, you take it in good faith that they're filling it in correctly, and then you check what it is that they've said. So if they've admitted anything, no looking outside what's on the form.
That's broadly correct, yes. And the only reason I say broadly is that there is also an assumption that, and it's a declared assumption, that your entries into that form are true to the full and true. Therefore, we would be confirming the appointment and issuing a contract on the basis of a full declaration.
Yeah, and we ought to say, I mean, that is true of almost all conflict of interest systems. I believe it's true for the conflict of interest system operating in Punt, that they are self-declared and then scrutinised. And it's certainly what we do in the wider civil service. We obviously have other processes that we will come onto, which look at things in rather more detail.
Just to clarify on this point,
yeah.
When you say that you've got multiple people who have been brought in externally as appointments, what out of all of these appointments, how many of them have a track record of not declaring conflicts of interest? Because if that's a systemic problem, then you've got a problem with the system. If this is a one-off, then it would suggest that in this situation it's worth having an alternative system.
I don't know what Lord Mandelson would say about the accusation you have made about what he has done. But, as I say, we have several systems that run here, and our security is maintained by the interaction of those systems. We have a due diligence exercise that we will come on to.
Wait a minute. I'm so sorry to cut across you, because I also want to remind the committee we are still on question 1. Yes. So, and Chris is trying to move us on, and indeed I agree with him. We need to move on because there's the system of vetting that Sir Ollie has talked about, which would be the normal way for appointing or having candidates for ambassadorial purposes. Then there is a further system that is also done by Sir Chris, and I think we need to make sure that we cover.
So there are 3 processes.
Yes, I know.
Yes, and
I'm just trying to get on to process 2.
Yes.
So if I could just move on to process 2, and then we'll get on to process 3. And Umar, I'm sorry, but I just really want to get on to the next question. I'm so sorry.
I have some follow-up to this.
Go on then. Go on. Sorry.
We're talking about systems, but seemingly none of your systems, whether it was system 1, 2 or 3, have adequately flagged any of the issues. I've got a copy of the letter here to the chair of PACAC where you've said due diligence largely collates publicly available information, and that a summary of reputational risks, including his previous resignations and his prior relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, has been flagged. But as those responsible for doing the due diligence and the vetting, did you not then flag to number 10 or to others that this is a very serious issue here?
Uma, we are getting onto that. I'm just trying to do it systematically. I'm so sorry. So what I want to do is to begin, because as I say, there are a number of processes. So we've asked questions about difficulties in relation to process 1. If Fleur can move us on to process 2. Yep.
Okay. Chris, so process 2 to move on to is the standard process for developed vetting, which I understand is the level of clearance that a senior ambassador, such as the ambassador to the USA, would have. Could you just give us some information about that process?
Yes, so now we're not actually doing these things in chronological order, by the way. So the first thing we did was the due diligence, which we will do last. And in this case, I think the developed vetting, in fact, came last. I'll say some general things about developed vetting, the first of which it's carried out by the employing on behalf of the employing institution, the FCDO. So it would have been, in this case, the FCDO that commissioned the developed vetting. We publish a variety of information about what developed vetting covers, and we won't go beyond our published information. But basically, the checks involved are a baseline personal security standard, a completion by the individual of a DV security questionnaire, a departmental and company records check, which will include staff files, staff reports, sick leave returns and security records, a check of both spent and unspent criminal records, a check of credit and financial history, security service records, a full review of personal finances, a detailed interview conducted by a trained investigating officer, further inquiries including interviews with referees conducted by a trained investigating officer, checks may extend to third parties included on the security questionnaire, and the full review of personal finances will include an assessment of the individual's assets, liabilities, income and expenditure. That's all set out on the Cabinet Office website. Now, as I say, we don't go into further details of the developed vetting process, either in general or for individuals, for reasons that you will understand, but we do give that rather comprehensive description of what developed vetting covers. Now, the important bit, and this is where we're getting to in my exchanges with other members of the committee, is that is, of course, a proactive process. The conflicts of interest process we described is a self-declaration process. What I've just described is obviously a process of going and proactively looking at records, not simply reacting to what either the appointee or the candidate tells us. Is there anything you want to add on the FCDO side?
Very much. So where in that process would the conversation about what are your what interests do you have beyond that, the personal interest that Epstein would have come up with the process which of those, the investigation? There's a couple of investigations at the end of that list. Is that likely to be where the conversation would come up? And then what is the end product of that whole process? Is there one report?
I'll leave it to Oliver to describe what happened in this particular case. We don't go into the details of what happens within the developed vetting process, either in general or for individuals.
So in general, which part of those processes would come up? The personal associations would. Which part be in?
It's as I've described. So there was a detailed interview with an investigating officer which covers all information that I've listed out.
So that detailed interview, and the one with the referees as well, I presume that potentially that could be where it came out to.
Again, I'm not going to comment on what happened in the individual. In general, you would expect that any issues that arose out of the research done would then be picked up in the various interviews conducted in the way I've described.
And in general, what is the end product of all of that vetting? Does it all get put into one report, and who receives that report?
The report is received by the employing department and the employing line manager. So in this, that would be Sir Oliver, and then a decision is taken on whether the relevant level of security clearance is to be granted or not, and what, if any, mitigations are required.
Is that taken by solely by you? As you hand over the report, do you have the data and then solely says yes?
Cut in, Chris, sorry. Just in our case, it may be different in other places, because almost all of the over 8,000 people who are UK-based people for the Foreign Office who work for us are subject to DV. We don't normally take those decisions at line manager level, let alone at permanent undersecretary level. We delegate the responsibility for receiving the report from UK security vetting to our personnel security team in the Foreign Office. Obviously, the vast majority of these are relatively straightforward. Ones that require more senior judgment and potentially a discussion of managing and mitigating risks are escalated appropriately.
Did you see it?
Wait a minute, I want to get on to Uma, and then we'll take some other questions. Go on.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I'm trying to gather my thoughts because there's a lot that's coming our way. So to reference the earlier question I asked, there were a number of vetting processes, you've just set them out. But did none of those flag that a well-publicised friendship with the world's most notorious paedophile might be a problem to the government?
Well, may I, Chair? Because I think what Chris was getting at earlier is, if I, approach this chronologically, back before Lord Mandelson was announced as the appointee, there was a process which Chris will be happy to talk to, done in the Cabinet Office to make sure the Prime Minister was aware of Lord Mandelson and the issues around his appointment. There was then a process of clearing his conflicts of interest, which the employing department oversaw, which we've talked about. And actually in parallel with that process, we also went through the standard UK security vetting, national security vetting process for DV. So I think one of those processes where we can confidently say the relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was indeed surfaced, was the first of those processes. As Chris has explained to you,
which is a due diligence one.
We're not at liberty, just to at risk of being boring, we're not at liberty to say whether or not it would have come up during the national security vetting process. And it was not regarded, it would not have been regarded. I would have been surprised to see it on a conflict of interest form, because that's more about offices, interests and assets that you hold that have a bearing on the government's reputation.
Do you think your due diligence and vetting process is fit for purpose given what we're discussing?
Well, on your original question, and we'll cover this when we cover the due diligence exercise, and as I put in the letter to the committee, all public knowledge about Lord Mandelson from the open source due diligence that we did was included in the due diligence, including his relationship with Mr. Epstein. Was that fit for purpose? Well, we believe it could be improved. And that is what.
That's an understatement,
well,
isn't it?
No, because the issue over which Lord Mandelson had his was withdrawn from Washington was information, and the Prime Minister set this out very clearly. That was not available to us at the time that the due diligence was done. The Prime Minister has been on the record about this and has explained exactly why he took that decision. So there are two issues here. There is the process. As I say, we believe the process can be improved, and indeed we have improved it. And there is what information was available at the time, and the issues over which the ambassador was withdrawn from Washington was based on information that was not known at the time.
Do you have any other questions, Uma, before I move on to others?
Can I suggest then, in light of your answers, thank you both, that perhaps association with well-known paedophiles are flagged for any future appointments, because none of your processes seem to flag it as an issue?
That's not correct. So as you'll see from my letter,
we'll get on to
as you'll see from my letter,
the
Lord Mandelson's connections with Lord Epstein were flagged in the due diligence exercise that the Cabinet Office carried out.
Absam. No, sorry, not Absam. Sorry, Afra, I beg your pardon.
I just wanted to touch on that to do with the due diligence, but also had a couple of quick questions regarding the earlier conversation. But since we're talking about what came up during the due diligence, I mean, publicly available information at the time was that Mandelson and Epstein had kept a notoriously close relationship, and that in June 2009, Mandelson had stayed at Epstein's townhouse in Manhattan. That would have coincided with the time that Mandelson was UK Business Secretary, and also the time that Epstein was in prison for soliciting prostitution from an underage girl, a child. Both the FT and The Guardian refer to further examples of Mandelson and Epstein communications during 2009, 2010 and 2011. There are pictures of Mandelson shopping with Epstein in the Caribbean, also emerged prior to Mandelson's appointment as ambassador. And the Financial Times and the Daily Mail in 23 and 22 reported on a photo that had emerged of Mandelson celebrating a birthday at Epstein's apartment in 2007. These dates all occur after Epstein being charged in 2006 with soliciting prostitution, and after 2008 when he was pleaded guilty to charges of soliciting prostitution from a person under the age of 18. So I'm just wondering, because in my opinion it is absolutely deplorable that we would have somebody with an attitude towards women and girls in such an important and significant position within our representing our country. At what point were questions raised about whether that was appropriate, and why does it seem that suddenly a small additional bit of information would tip the balance on that being at one point deemed appropriate to then not appropriate?
Yeah. So the due diligence process has effectively two parts to it. There is the identification of information and then there is judgment. On the identification of information, which is the due diligence process that was run by Cabinet Office. I refer you to the second bullet point of my letter to Simon and this committee, where it sets out the reputational risks that were identified in relation to Jeffrey Epstein, including the media reporting. There's then a judgment about whether to make the appointment or not. And as I say, the Prime Minister has set out in quite some detail in his media interviews the judgment he took, and then the further information that came to light, I believe in September, which certainly the Prime Minister, and I don't think quite a lot of other peoples, would describe as minor, which were the new and previously unknown emails that led to the decision to withdraw the ambassador to Washington.
So all of the information that I read out was shared with the Prime Minister prior to his appointment and was considered not sufficient to cause concern about appointment.
It's the information set out in bullet 2 of my letter.
Could you, just because I have quite a lot of paperwork in front of me, would you mind reading out bullet 2?
A summary of reputation. So, in the case of the former HMA Washington, the report, that's the due diligence report, included a summary of his professional and financial relationships and an initial assessment of what steps may be required in order to resolve any potential conflicts of interest in order to take up the role. And then the key bullet point, a summary of reputational risks, including his previous resignations as a minister. I think previously someone suggested he was sacked. I think he in fact resigned. And his prior relationships with Jeffrey Epstein. This section included direct extracts from media reporting and notes of general reputational risk. The only information which was not already in the public domain at the time is a reference to official records which have since been disclosed by the National Archives, which relate to a Tony Blair meeting with Epstein that was facilitated by the former ambassador at the time. A list of the former ambassador's previous political and non-political roles, and a section on internet searches which summarises news reporting available at the time. So that is what the due diligence exercise covered.
I think the answer is yes, really, then.
It is exactly as I set out in my letter.
Can we just go back to, again, I'm sorry to be so boring and just trying to keep structure here, guys, but can I go on to Abdesam, and then let's just try and get through, and then we'll move on to the due diligence process with Phil.
It's fine, and I think my question relates directly to my colleague's question. In terms of timescales, so he was appointed on December 20th.
That's the date of announcement.
Were you asked to fast track the vetting process? Because that's a very short time frame to appoint somebody of such a senior position.
There is provision within our, and I think most departments, arrangements with UK security vetting, who do the vetting process, that we're allowed to ask for a number of priority clearances every year to make sure they sort of jump the queue to be done earlier than others. And we use that for Lord Mandelson. It doesn't mean there is any difference in the process, and it's a standard product that UKSV offer. So yes, it was faster than some people's clearances will have been. That's not because the process was different. It was because we advanced him up the queue.
And so in any of that process, was any part skipped or removed or stripped entirely? No. Nothing was removed. Okay, and do you had sufficient time to carry out meaningful checks?
So as what I can say to you, Ms. Mohammed, is that I am absolutely confident that UKSV undertook the process in precisely their standard way, doing all of the checks they would expect to do, and we had ample time to assess and decide on the basis of their work.
And given that he was eventually appointed, came to position in February, were you satisfied at that point that the information that was already in the public domain would not cause any potential reputational embarrassment?
So, at risk of sounding like a pedant, that wouldn't have been a judgment for me to make as part of the vetting process. The important decision on that had already been taken some time before, when it was decided to appoint him.
Yeah. Phil, I know some of the ground that you were going to cover has already been covered, but do you mind just filling in the holes?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Most of my questions will be for yourself, Sir Chris. And you spoke to your letter to the Chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, which set out a little bit of the due diligence process that the Proprietary and Ethics team carries out. What is the purpose of the due diligence process?
Right, it is to inform decisions about reputational risk. And as I say, it's very important to see the three processes working in tandem. Due diligence, open source due diligence, is something that we regularly do for external appointments. And what it does is, what any excellent journalist or excellent parliament researcher could do. It looks for the open source information that is about the individual. It turns it into a easy to read report, and it is there to inform the decision maker of the reputational risks you might run and might need to mitigate were you to make the appointment. So it is not a decision-making thing. It does not make a recommendation. It is raises questions, and it's then for the decision maker, which in this case was ministers, to decide if those are reputational risks that they are prepared to bear, and what mitigations would be needed were the person to be appointed. That's very different from the process we just described, the security vetting service, which does lead to specific recommendations, which are then taken by the department in question. So that is what it is for. It is to inform the decision maker of potential reputational risks.
Is it possible that somebody has due diligence done on them by the team in the Cabinet Office, and therefore a decision is made once that is concluded that they don't then proceed through the vetting process?
Well, as I say, the two things are completely separate. If your question is, are there occasions when somebody might look at a due diligence report and decide they do not want to proceed, that is certainly possible, yes. And
what is the skill set of the individuals who are conducting the due diligence that is done within the PET?
Well, it's the Propriety and Ethics team in the Cabinet Office that normally does it. They do this on a number of occasions and become very skilled. But as I say, what you're doing is an open source search that would be very similar to the type that an investigative journalist could do, that a parliamentary researcher could do, that indeed anyone with the appropriate skills could do. There is nothing that goes into those due diligence reports, and in this case, except for the one piece of information that I read out earlier, it is by definition publicly available information.
Now, you spoke to your letter.
Can I just show it a moment? So okay, so there's a skill set involved in actually winkling out the information, but isn't there also a skill set involved in asking the questions and getting an answer and getting the truth out? I mean, isn't there a skill set there? Do you have people with that?
So the due diligence exercise that we do, and as I say, we do this in a large number of cases whenever we're appointing externally to senior roles. That does not involve an interview with the individual. The interview with the individual comes as a part of the processes that we were describing earlier. It is an open source search of what are the reputational issues relating to that individual. The individual is not brought in and questioned by that due diligence process. We described the processes in which people are interviewed previously.
In your letter to the Chair of PACA on the 30th of October, you mentioned that there'll be the introduction of a standard requirement for due diligence to be carried out.
Yeah, so
what does that mean?
Right,
and why wasn't there a standard requirement beforehand?
So beforehand, and this has been, as far as I can see, the precedent for quite some time. There were a set of checks that were recommended for these types of appointment, which we have just described. It's the conflicts of interest, it's security vetting as appropriate, and it's the due diligence exercise. When we looked at this case, and I think this is set out in my letter, we believe that process can be strengthened, and we published, which was attached to my letter, new guidance that will be applied across the civil service, and Sir Oliver will be introducing similar to arrangements for ambassadors to have a much more clearly set out process, and it's set out very clearly in the guidance that we've published, and sets out exactly the steps that ought to be undertaken for any direct ministerial appointment, whether it's an ambassador or not. I won't read the whole thing out because it's pages, but it's set out for you in that guidance, which is on gov.uk.
Just to be clear, before this new process is instituted for direct ministerial appointments, we're saying there was no standard guidance around what
there was guidance which largely sets out what I've said. It sets out the checks that should be done. We thought that guidance could be strengthened, and we have done so, I believe, quite considerably in the guidance that we have just published.
Can we see the old guidance?
Yeah, I think it's on gov.uk as well.
No, it's not.
Pretty sure it is.
No, it's not.
I found it there. Anyway, we'll post it.
Well, we're incapable of finding it. So could you send us a copy?
I'm more than happy to send it to you. But I set out the main changes in my letter, along with the new guidance. Again, I won't read them out for time.
My final question: we talked about departmental responsibilities earlier. As I understand it, it was the Cabinet Office that did the due checks.
Yes.
Why was it the Cabinet Office, and why wasn't it done by the appointing department in the Foreign Office?
Because in this case, the appointing minister was going to be the Prime Minister, and the Cabinet Office is the department of the Prime Minister.
Is that something that will be looked at in the future in terms of making sure there's a handover of information from the Cabinet Office to the Foreign Office, where there is a direct...
I don't believe that was an issue in the case, or indeed in any other cases. As I'm saying, what shows up in due diligence is all publicly available information, and is therefore by definition available to any other department. And as I've described in the security vetting process, all that information would be identified again in any case.
But in future, direct ministerial appointments are going to have due diligence done by the department that has decided they want to do direct ministerial. It's going to be done by you, isn't that right?
We do it on a practical basis. So very frequently, PET acts on behalf of another department.
I'm relying on this guidance.
Yes.
And
the responsibility. There's a difference between the responsibility and then who physically does it. Mm-hmm. So the responsibility is on the appointing minister and the appointing department. Whether that department happens to have people with the skill set you were describing earlier, or whether they wish to commission Cabinet Office or someone to do it on their behalf, but the accountability to both commission it, receive the information and take the decision is on the appointing department.
They won't be able to point fingers at the Cabinet Office to take responsibility.
I don't think there's been any finger pointing in this case. We have described the processes that went through.
Before we move on, I think Dan has been waiting for some time, and Fleur and Afra.
I just want to pick up a loose end from the questions that were asked to you, Sir Ollie, on developed vetting. You said they were submitted to a vetting team in the FCDO. So for all staff who have developed vetting, those reports are received by a vetting team.
We have a personnel security team that is responsible for understanding and setting policy around personnel security for the department as a whole, including receiving recommendations.
They can be escalated.
They can be.
And so in your time at the FCDO, how many have been escalated?
I don't have numbers on that, and to be honest, I think this falls under Chris's general warning that the further we get into this, the more difficult it is to maintain the vetting system.
Was Lord Mandelson's one that was escalated?
I certainly can't comment on that, I'm afraid, for the same reason.
Fleur and then Afra.
Thank you. Having read the changes, it is hard to know what the changes are in this new document. I can't see the old one, but there's a process in here which is about a fireside chat. So if in the direct ministerial appointment in Tier 1, at a certain stage, if there are concerns raised, there is the provision for, in reaching a decision, the minister or senior official may wish to conduct a fireside chat to discuss the requirements of the role. Does the fireside chat mean that it's sort of off the record? What is that part of the process?
So
was that held with Lord Mandelson?
So what we're trying to do here, and Sir Oliver touched on this earlier, is we are seeking to replicate for direct ministerial appointments exactly what we do for advertised appointments, as it were. So it's reasonably standard practice when we are doing very senior appointments, permanent secretaries, etc., for the minister to hold a fireside chat with the individual in question, which is not part of the decision-making process, which is why it's described in that way. For senior civil servants, a civil service commissioner would be present to ensure that the process was being followed properly. We do that when we externally advertise a job and have several candidates, so we're replicating that for direct ministerial appointments. And likewise, as we described earlier, and this is the other big change, when there is a panel interview, questions about conflicts of interest, about any other issues that the candidate wishes to bring to attention are part of the interview and are therefore recorded. The answers are recorded as a part of the interview process, and we're replicating that for a direct ministerial appointment. So as it were, that part of what would normally be the interview process takes place will take place in direct ministerial appointment situations too. So what we're really trying to do with our new guidance is, I say, replicate for direct appointments all the processes that go on for advertised appointments and bring the two completely into line. That does not give you perfect defence for the reasons that we were discussing earlier. It's still based on the information that is available at the time, but we take the view that there ought to be consistency in the level of rigour between the two types of appointment, between the advertised appointments and the direct appointments. And as I say, while that doesn't create a system that will never make mistakes or never fail, if it's appropriate for one, it's appropriate for the other.
So did the fireside chat part of it come up in Lord Mandelson's appointment, and where in the order of it?
No, so this is something that we have added, as I say, to replicate what we do for advertised appointments.
Okay, I've got Afra, and then I think I've got Ed.
Thank you. I just want to try to understand this a bit more, because I think to many people it feels like common sense was perhaps thrown out the window. Publicly available information about vetting says that the vetting interviewer will ask about friends and associations. So one might assume that as part of that process, I appreciate you're not going to tell us the detail of it, things came up about Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. In the due diligence process, we are aware that publicly available information, which I've read out some of it already, will have come up about Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I'm just wondering whether any of this information at any point, in any way, triggered anybody at the Cabinet Office or at the FCDO to ask any further questions to establish the full context of the former ambassador's relationship with Epstein.
Well, as I said before, there are two things that happen in these processes. There is the process of fact-finding, which is what I've described, and then there is the process of judgment as to whether the issues that have arisen are material to the appointment. The issues you're raising are in the second category, and as I say, the Prime Minister has already explained in really quite some detail in media interviews and elsewhere what he did, why he did it, and then why he withdrew.
That really good enough. I mean, it really isn't.
Well, I'm sorry, that is the position.
Let me just come in behind Afra on this. Look, at the time when there was due diligence, right, when you were looking at what's publicly available, if he'd come before us, we would have looked in the internet, we would have Googled, and we would have found that Channel 4 had done a documentary, The Prince and the Paedophile, which clearly highlighted Mandelson's links with Epstein. We would have given consideration to what was in the Financial Times and the Guardian reports in June 23, which referenced the JP Morgan internal investigation, and I think which gave the most damning of all, which was when Epstein was sentenced in 2008 to 18 months imprisonment for soliciting an underage girl. Peter Mandelson goes and stays in his flat, his townhouse in Manhattan in 2009. And at the time, Peter Mandelson's business secretary. So we've got the business secretary staying in the townhouse in Manhattan of someone who's been convicted of paedophilia. Now, my question is, you find this out, presumably you've got a researcher who can do what, my researcher did, and you find this out. Did anybody ask him about this? I mean, and when did anybody ask him about this?
Well, as I say, I've probably gone as far in answering the question as I can. The Prime Minister has described, as I say, in quite some detail the decisions that he took and why he took them. And as I say, the questions you are raising are about the judgment part of this exercise, which, as I say...
I'm not asking questions about that. What I'm asking about is not the judgment, because as you've said, it wasn't your judgment, it was the judgment of the Prime Minister. What I want to know was the Prime Minister let down? Was the Prime Minister told that that Epstein had stayed in Mandelson's flat? Sorry. That Mandelson had stayed in Epstein's flat in Manhattan in 2009 when Epstein was serving 18 months for paedophilia. Was the Prime Minister told that? And was the Prime Minister told what Mandelson's answer to that challenge was? Because if the Prime Minister wasn't told that, we can hardly say, pass the blame on to the Prime Minister for not using his judgment. What information was he given?
Nobody is passing blame anywhere. I'm simply factually describing what happened, and that question is also one that the Prime Minister has been asked and answered on the media, and I believe he has said that he does not believe he was let down either by the process or by anyone involved in the process. I think that was his answer on the 15th of September on Channel 4 News.
Did the FCDO have a different view about who should be recommended for the posting?
Well, at the time we're describing, it was clear that the Prime Minister wanted to make this appointment himself and had therefore I understand that the FCDO was informed of his decision and acted upon it, and via the Foreign Secretary sought and obtained the King's approval for the appointment. But we were, in this particular case, as Chris has explained, the Prime Minister took advice and then formed a view himself, and we then acted on that view.
Just so we're clear, the due diligence report that was produced by the Cabinet Office goes to the appointing minister, in this case, it's the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister received that report, which should have contained all of the information pertaining to Lord Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, according to your own submission to PACAC, which is that it included reference to his prior relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. So the Prime Minister got a report that outlined that relationship, and as the appointing minister, he then makes a decision on whether or not this person is suitable for that appointment based on that report.
I'll answer in the general rather than the specifics of the case. I've set out in my letter exactly what the due diligence report covers. The process then for any direct ministerial appointment that is shared with the appointing minister, and they take the decision. Just to correct something that was said earlier. I appreciate you talking
in the general, but just to the specifics, your own letter to PACAC says the due diligence report included reference to his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, that's the bit I read out.
And that the report goes to the appointing minister, who in this case is the Prime Minister. So
and a section of internet searches which summarises news reporting available at the time.
Yeah. So
Exactly
even
as
if we're
set
talking
out
in the
in my
generals,
letter.
in the specific in this case, the Prime Minister did receive a report that highlighted that relationship, and it was up to him to make a decision based on the information. Assuming
For a direct ministerial appointment, that is the process. Now, as I say,
I think it's really important for us to be clear about, and I'm sorry to keep wanging on about this, but was the Prime Minister told that Peter Mandelson had stayed at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse in 2009 when Epstein was in prison for soliciting an underage girl?
I've said as much as I'm going to say about the content of the due diligence report,
Why can't you tell us that? Why can't you tell us that?
In my letter. Well, so for the long-standing reason that we protect advice that goes to the Prime Minister, I've actually gone a long way in describing what this due diligence report covered as set out in my letter, and that is as far as I can go.
Can you give us a list of the articles and the when you refer to the news reporting available at the time? Can you give us the list of the news reports that you sent to the Prime Minister?
I've set out in my letter as far as I can go. If the committee is requesting information, I'm quite happy to take that question away and see whether there are other things that can be shared. But as I say, I've set out in my letter the information that I can currently make available.
Yeah, so question number one is, did you tell the Prime Minister about Mandelson staying in the Manhattan townhouse during Epstein being in jail? And if you can't answer that, or you can't give us what we want, then what media reports did you give to the Prime Minister so that he could at least read it for himself?
I will consider whether there is further information that can be shared, and I will write to the committee.
Anybody have any further on this? You wanted a question on this?
Well, it seems to me like Sir Chris quoted the Prime Minister saying that he wasn't told when he was interviewed on Channel 4 News, but it seems to me like us the opposite.
No. I think the part of his interview you're referring to is the information that subsequently came to light of the new emails that no one was aware of at the point of appointment. I think the part of the interview you're referring to is when he's discussing that.
Yeah, all right, do come on.
So Chris, I would like to, and so Ollie, I'd like to move on to specifically the new information that became available, which led to the departure of Lord Mandelson as ambassador. Just to be clear, did he resign or was he sacked?
He was withdrawn. He did not resign.
I'm sorry.
He was withdrawn from post. He did not resign.
He did not resign, so he was sacked.
As I say, he was withdrawn from post.
Okay, so the new information which were contained in the emails which were made available to Bloomberg, was that the first knowledge you had of their existence?
It was when this issue arose back in mid-September, that was certainly the first I'd heard of such emails, yes.
So the US administration that had the emails had never made available any information to you. It was only through the media that you found out.
I certainly wasn't given information by the US government, no.
Okay, so Bloomberg obtained the emails, I think on the Tuesday evening, and obviously the Foreign Office then analysed them, but they didn't tell the Prime Minister until after he had appeared in the House of Commons the following day to express his confidence in Lord Mandelson.
Well, we received the material. We asked some questions about that material, which the Prime Minister has commented on in his public remarks. I can't speak to exactly what he saw at what point, Sir John, but Chris and I were in constant contact about it, and I was briefing the Foreign Secretary as to how we're doing the case. The issue here, I think, and
it must have been apparent to you before the Prime Minister got up at 12 o'clock on Wednesday that this was pretty explosive. And did somebody not say to Number 10, hold on, just before you express your complete confidence in Lord Mandelson, there's something here you might like to be aware of?
Well, Chris may be able to say a bit more about the process by which the Prime Minister has briefed Prime Minister's questions. The fact of this media inquiry which obviously I knew about, was also known to Number 10. Chris and I had discussed it, and the Foreign Secretary, Chris, and I were clear that this needed to be dealt with sensitively and as a management issue. We needed to be, I know in the kind of context and tone of this hearing, this may sound naive, and forgive me for that, but I needed to behave to Lord Mandelson as an employee to whom I owed a duty of care. He was in an extremely exposed position, and I had to make sure I was thinking about and looking after the way in which we were dealing with him, and dealing with him fairly and transparently. So the way we did that was to make sure that we were asking him firm, rigorous, clear questions about the material, but not seeking to involve ministers in the detail of those questions and how we were approaching it, in order to avoid any sense in which he was being treated differently from their employees.
So you're saying to protect Lord Mandelson, you gave no indication to Number 10 before Prime Minister's questions that you had come across information which might cause serious doubt as to the appropriateness of his position.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I think the Prime Minister's on the record as saying he was aware that there was a media inquiry before Prime Minister's questions. He knew that we were in touch with Lord Mandelson about these issues. As I say, I was not involved in briefing him specifically for Prime Minister's questions, but I don't think it would be fair to say that Number 10 were unaware that we were in this dialogue with Lord Mandelson about this issue.
But they then said that new information had become available after the Prime Minister had expressed his confidence.
The emails were only published later on that day, and at the point that the Prime Minister stood up at Prime Minister's questions, Lord Mandelson had not had an opportunity yet to comment himself on the points that had been raised with him about the veracity and
you had not told the
Prime
Minister that you had not told the Prime Minister at that stage that there were all of these emails in which Lord Mandelson was expressing his continuing support and friendship for Jeffrey Epstein.
I had not personally spoken to the Prime Minister about it, no.
Well, what about your department? And the department briefs Number 10 prior to Prime Minister's questions.
As I say, I was not involved in briefing the Prime Minister for Prime Minister's questions, but as I think the Prime Minister is on the record himself as saying on the 15th of September, he was aware of the existence of the media inquiry, and he knew that official inquiries were being pursued.
Chris, do you have anything to add?
No, Sir Oliver is completely correct, and again, the Prime Minister has answered these questions in detail in his media interviews. Both what he knew before PMQs and why he took the decision after PMQs. He does say that in retrospect, and I'm quoting exactly, it would have been better if I had been shown the details of the material before PMQs.
But this goes back to what the Chair was saying earlier, that the Prime Minister is under fire, essentially because the Foreign Office did not properly inform him.
No, I don't think that's true at all. The Prime Minister, as we've said, was aware that there was an issue, but not the nature of that issue. The investigations into the nature of that issue were underway at the time. It was an extremely fast-moving situation. The situation clarified itself later that evening, and the Prime Minister took the decision that he took. As the Prime Minister says, with retrospect...
I'm sorry, but the point is this, isn't it? You can tell the Prime Minister there is an issue and that is being clarified. It gives the Prime Minister no idea as to how serious that issue is. So,
it's true.
So saying, oh, there's an issue, we're clarifying it, will mean that the Prime Minister is likely to say, as one would hope as a good employer in the end, that everybody, so I have confidence in my staff, because no one's told him anything other than that. But you had the information and you were keeping it to yourself and letting the Prime Minister down, weren't you?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. Now, you make reference to good employers, and I'm sure everyone on the committee does this with their own staff. If there are issues, you wait until you've investigated them properly, certainly before you say anything about them in public. And as Sir Oliver says, although he's a very high-profile individual, Lord Mandelson deserves to be treated as any other employer. That at that point you had some allegations from a media organisation that clearly needed
allegations. It was copies of emails.
Well, that needed to be looked into in the course of that day. That was completed, and the Prime Minister
must have realised that the contents of those emails were expensive, that it completely changed the perception.
Well, no, it was consistent with him staying. Sorry, I'm banging on this again, but it's consistent with him staying in Epstein's townhouse when Epstein's in jail for paedophilia.
Well, clearly, the emails came to light, and as the Prime Minister has said, were game-changing in terms of what was known about.
They were game-changing, but you didn't give any indication to the Prime Minister of their existence.
As I say, he was briefed on the existence of an issue, but at that point, the investigations into those emails had not been completed.
Let me get to Uma.
Just to disclose, I used to prepare the now Prime Minister for Prime Minister's questions when he was Leader of the Opposition. So I'm asking a question in relation to that. Did you not think that it was part of your role to brief, if not the Prime Minister, the people who prepare the Prime Minister for Prime Minister's questions, that the allegations in these emails, or the allegations that Bloomberg News had, were pretty serious, because he was going to be on live telly expressing full confidence in one of the employees of the Foreign Office?
Well, I don't personally get involved in the briefings for Prime Minister's questions. I would expect that major issues...
The severity of this issue warrant an intervention?
As I say, I don't get involved in the briefings for Prime Minister's questions. You would expect, given that it was a major news story at the time, that would have come up in the way that you describe. But I come back to, and I think the Chair made the point, that while investigations are underway, you do have a duty of care towards your employees about what you say in public when investigations are not completed. Now, as I've said, and the Prime Minister has been very clear about this, he believes that with the benefit of hindsight, it would have been better if he had seen the emails prior to PMQs.
I just wanted to clarify exactly what information had been shared with number and what hadn't. You've expressed that it was shared that there was an issue. As I understand it, a letter or an email communication was received from Bloomberg that included excerpts of the emails between Mandelson and Epstein. Was this letter or this email, whichever format it came in, shared in its entirety with number 10 prior to PMQs?
So the FCDO had received, you had received information from Bloomberg's.
So the bit of this story I can swear to is that we received from British Embassy Washington, we being headquarters in London at the FCDO, received from British Embassy Washington the communication from Bloomberg in advance of PMQs, and it's on that basis that we then went back to Lord Mandelson and posed questions to him about the veracity of the allegations. And excuse me for reaching across a couple of questions here, but again, at risk of sounding both pedantic and naive, we didn't even know for sure at that stage, of course, that Lord Mandelson accepted that these emails were truly his emails. So we owed him a duty of at least seeking to establish that he recognised these emails and that he thought it was plausible that he had sent them. And we did have that information, Mr. Brandreth, before PMQs, and it was on that basis that in advance of PMQs we had gone back to Lord Mandelson and posed questions to him about these.
So can I clarify, did you share that information that you'd received as an email with number 10 in its entirety? Not a conversation, not a there's an issue, but did you forward or share that email?
I personally did not.
But did somebody from the FCDO?
Not that, well, certainly not to my knowledge.
So perhaps you can say if you did share that information with anybody beyond yourself and the immediate people that it was sent to.
I sought the kind of advice on an issue like this that you would expect. HR, legal, I made sure that my boss here was aware of what I was doing and the way I was approaching it, and I also made sure that my political boss, the Foreign Secretary, was aware that I thought this was best handled as a management issue, and that was the basis on which I went back to Lord Mandelson.
And is that the same as your understanding?
Yeah, and I return to the point that we are talking about our employee here. So when you
also the Prime Minister's employee. I mean, we've discussed
no,
the fact that he was the person who made the decision to appoint Lord Mandelson.
But he's an employee of the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office as a civil servant at this point. And as I'm sure, as I say, you're all aware from being employers yourself, when you receive a set of allegations, you give people the chance to reply, to say, no, I didn't send those emails, or those emails are not correct, or whatever. And that process, as Oliver has described, was underway at the point of PMQs, but had not completed. But I do return to the Prime Minister's statement on Channel 4 News, where he makes his view clear.
With hindsight, do you think that it was a mistake to take this primarily as a managerial issue and not a political issue?
No, because, as I say, although this is a high-profile individual with a political past, he's also an employee, and he has all the rights of an employee, and he deserves to be given the same opportunities to rebut accusations as any other employee. Now, it obviously is a political question as well, in that it was raised in the political field and by journalists and by the opposition at PMQ, so it is clearly both. But there is no point when we can say this person ceases to have the rights of an employee and to be with duty of care and what everyone would expect. Are they an employee? At no point is that disengaged.
What we're asking you is, why on earth didn't you just alert the Prime Minister to the seriousness of the allegations?
I don't think there's very much we can add to what we've said already. He was alerted to the issue. He's made clear that with hindsight he wishes he had seen the detail of the allegations before PMQs.
The problem that I'm dealing with, and you know, I suspect a lot of people out there are struggling with, is this idea that the emails constituted materially different information that would have resulted in Lord Mandelson not being appointed. I think I certainly look at this, and hopefully any rational person would look at it and go, you have somebody who has a long, close and deep relationship with a known paedophile. That makes them suitable for the appointment. Staying with them in their townhouse while they're under investigation and being prosecuted for being a paedophile, that still makes you sentenced.
They were 18 months in prison.
Still makes you qualified for this appointment. But maintaining the relationship afterwards suddenly makes you unsuitable for the appointment. And, I mean, all of this could have been avoided if at any point anyone turned around and went, do you know what, actually, let's not appoint somebody who has a really close known relationship with a convicted paedophile.
Well, as I say, the Prime Minister has answered all these questions, including, and he set out in quite some detail, why the information that came to light in September was substantively different from that was available at the time.
Okay. I think you've got
I've two just final questions on this section. So, Ollie, you made clear that Lord Mandelson was withdrawn from his position. He did not resign. Is he still on the civil service payroll?
No.
Not?
No, he's not.
Is he receiving any kind of settlement or payoff?
We have dealt with him, as I hope you'd expect, in accordance with his contract.
So what's the answer?
It being an employment contract, that is confidential between us. But we have dealt with him in the way he has contracted with us.
He was sacked, so is he still entitled under his contract to a payment?
I'm sorry, Sir John, as I say, the way in which we deal with individual employees' termination under their contract must remain confidential between us. So I'm not at liberty to say whether a settlement was made in his case. All I can tell you is it was done absolutely in accordance with written contract with us.
So the Foreign Office is not going to give any information as to whether payment was made to him?
Any implications of his termination will be reported in our annual report and accounts, but the termination payments below a particular threshold, I think it's £100,000, do not get itemised. Those above generally, it's £300,000. Those above £300,000 generally do. We will follow our normal process.
Yeah, I think Fleur has got one final question on this.
Yep, I think we could all conclude that the system failed along there. So we're now trying to look at whether we can trust the system in the future. So looking at those changes, looking at what went wrong along the way. Just part of the system to look at for one last time is the part between the appointment and starting work and then everything being found out. Was there any stage at which then Lord Mandelson came back again to say there have been some changes? I know when I was a minister, I filled in all these forms. At the end of it, it said you have to go to your permanent undersecretary if there's anything that changes along the way. It's over to you. There were changes clearly in what came out rather than what actually happened here. But did Lord Mandelson ever come back to you, Sir Ollie, to say there have been some changes along the way about this issue of relationship with Jeffrey Epstein or anything else?
The nature of my management conversations with Peter Mandelson, I think, I'm afraid, do have to be between us. What I would say is that nothing was disclosed to me that gave me cause for concern about the decisions that we have discussed today.
Okay, and which part of the process do you think is the bit that went wrong the most?
Me?
Yes, so we went through the different parts of the due diligence, the security vetting, the additional vetting, the reliability, the no fireside chat, the reliability on someone to disclose after that. Which part of that needs to be changed the most?
Hopefully, it's pretty strongly implicit in my letter to the chair that the way I have agreed with the Foreign Secretary that we will take account of the Cabinet Office's guidance on direct ministerial appointments and the way we will formalise the way in which this process is done for any future cases probably implies pretty strongly those areas where we would want to do things differently.
And that takes us neatly on, actually, to something which I think is missing from your letter to us. And that's this. If you're going to formalise the process, then it's our strong view that between the appointment and someone taking up their post, there's a training period. And we believe that alongside many other committees, when it comes to a direct ministerial appointment for ambassadors, that this committee should be given the opportunity of questioning such people. And can I just give you the arguments? The first thing is, PACAC does interviews of the Standards for Public Life chair. The Culture, Media and Sport interviews the chair of Ofcom, the BBC, the Charity Commission. The Treasury Committee does interviews everybody who's going to be on the Monetary Policy Committee. We're asking, and we thought we had an agreement from the former Foreign Secretary, that anyone who is a political appointment to an ambassadorial role comes before the committee before they begin the job. And the former Foreign Secretary said that Lord Mandelson was going to come before us, and then he never did. And to make matters worse, there was briefing that we'd had an opportunity to quiz him over breakfast in Washington, which from our recollection was 15 minutes when he was on the phone, and there were other people in the room anyway, and it was hardly the time for us to be asking him questions. So don't you think that if you're going to improve the process, that you should include us and our good sense in questioning some of the people who might be given political appointments in the future? Because at least our questions and the answers, whether they're truthful or not, would be on the record.
Thank you, Chair. And look, I read, and more importantly, the Foreign Secretary took note of what you said in the House about this. and we about it very seriously, I promise. The difference between these appointments and the ones that you lay out are, with respect, the list you gave me are independent office holders. These are people who are mainly created by statute to take public decisions on behalf of the people. And the appointments that we are talking about today, and indeed in the wider civil service, as Chris can talk to, are appointments for people who operate under the hand of ministers. They do not have a separate constitutional or statutory authority. And so our minister's view is that distinction needs to be preserved, that whatever background and by whatever process someone is appointed to a sort of commissary hearing, though I know you haven't used that word, but doesn't work for these appointments when they are speaking under the authority of ministers. What the Foreign Secretary is completely committed to, and I am too for what it's worth, is that where this committee wants to hear from heads of mission, by whatever route they have been appointed, we should do our best to make sure that after they have taken up their posting, they're available to do that. Now, the reason I say after they've taken up their posting is where I think there may be a very slight extra difference with diplomatic appointments is, as again, this committee will know well from your travels and your conversations, there can only be one ambassador at a time. And the risk for HMG is if there is a full and thoughtful hearing between a designated ambassador and this committee, whilst they're in the public domain as announced as going, but while there is a sitting High Commissioner or ambassador at post, it makes it very awkward for His Majesty's representative to do their job. And so we would, my ministers will continue to make sure that wherever possible we meet these committees' needs for briefings and hearings with individual senior heads of mission where those are important to you. But I don't think they can go as far as you're asking.
It wasn't a problem when the previous committee interviewed Sir Ed Llewellyn, and it wasn't a problem when previous committees interviewed Baroness Amos. I mean, there have been political appointments in the past. It is different, a political appointment. And given that it's a political appointment, it is right, I think, for the public to see why there has been a political appointment as opposed to a civil servant being given a particular position. And as I say, given that the appointments process has hardly been ideal until now and you're looking for changes that could be better, we would have Googled. We would have Googled and we would have asked him questions and we would have got some answers, truthful or not. Those answers would be before the public and we would be in a much better position than we are now if you had just included us as you said you were going to.
Your basic point about making sure that in how we do any such appointments in future, candidates or appointees are given on-the-record opportunities to disclose to us or a panel of us any future reputational vulnerabilities is very important, and I completely agree with it, and that is part of why I wrote to you separately following on from Chris's letter to PACAC, where ministers are in a different place than Emily. They think that, and my recollection is Ed Llewellyn came before this committee after he'd taken up his post as HMA Paris, not before, and that is because we are anxious for confusion to the host government, undermining the position of the existing head of mission if there is somebody before this committee doing their best to expound the government's view about the importance of the relationship and issues in often big and complex relationships for our most senior appointments, but there is someone sitting at post attempting to conduct that relationship who is a different person.
Okay, I'm negotiating here. Why can't we have someone then, if that's what you insist, we want to have them within the first 3 months? Because we were promised, when we were told, well, Mandelson can't come before he takes up the post, but he'll come as soon as he's in Britain. He was in Britain a lot. We never saw him. He never came before the committee, and we couldn't hold the Foreign Office to the promise that we'd had that Lord Mandelson was going to appear before the committee. So I'd like to have an undertaking from you today that we're going to, if there's any further political appointments to ambassadorial roles, that at least the Foreign Affairs Committee gets to speak to them within the first 3 months and get having the job.
I cannot give you that guarantee, but only, Chair, because
as you
know, decisions about whether I, let alone ambassadors, appear for you are for my Secretary of State and not for me. I hear you clearly, and you will have, of course, an opportunity to quiz the Foreign Secretary herself on some of these issues before too long.
All right, well, we'll ask her. We've just got a final question about the Chinese, and I think, John, were you, or was it Richard was going to say it? Sorry.
Just really reflecting on lessons learned.
Oh, sorry.
Thinking about these direct ministerial appointments, we've reflected today that the government made changes last month to the process for making direct ministerial appointments. Yet we've learned that the new process has actually introduced a so-called fireside chat between the political appointee and the minister who appoints them. So it sounds almost as though it's becoming more cosy and less transparent.
No, that's not true at all.
Well, can I ask then, we have Sir Ed Llewellyn, who is currently undertaking his second diplomatic posting in Rome, when it actually says that really by rights these things ought to be appointed for a specific term. I think the wording is the standard posting length or to the end of the Parliament, whichever is shorter. Was Sir Ed not subject to the Diplomatic Service Code, which already said that political appointees should only undertake one posting?
Lord Llewellyn's appointment was reconfirmed by the incoming Foreign Secretary after the general election. So the point about, he unusually, in partisan terms, he was a political appointee of this Labour government from July 2024.
Solly, can I ask you a separate question? It's been recently reported that you have visited Beijing. Can you tell us what was the purpose of the visit, and did the subject of diplomacy come up?
Absolutely, thank you, Sir John. Yes, my first ever visit to China, which was an important experience for me. Honestly, it's one of our largest networks around the world, and the purpose of my visit was both to see the embassy in Beijing and talk to the team there, of course, to have engagements with the authorities in Beijing. I then went on to Shenzhen and was looked after by our consulate in Guangzhou, and then went on to Hong Kong and spent a really valuable of the trip in Hong Kong, still seeing that despite all the difficulties, and they are of course legion, that is still a different and interesting and potentially unique relationship that the UK has with China through Hong Kong. So the purpose of my visit was, of course, partly to educate myself, honestly. This is, we can't escape the importance of China in the modern world, second largest economy, etc. You'll know all the statistics. But pastorally, it was very important to me. This is a big chunk of staff overseas, and I don't want to be impolitic, but it is a chunk of my staff who face unusual pressures, and I wanted to understand those pressures and hear from them myself about some of those pressures.
You meet Chinese officials whilst you were there?
All sorts of pressures, Sir John, which I won't go into in this.
I understand that. But did you talk to the Chinese?
And I have raised some of those issues myself with the Chinese authorities while I was there. So, of course, the Chinese authorities, as is firmly in public domain, are very focused on their planning application for their own embassy here in London. And they, of course, raised those issues with me while I was there. But the purpose of my visit was quite a lot broader.
And I know you know this, John, but obviously the planning decision is a quasi-judicial decision for the Secretary of State, for the relevant Secretary of State.
Thank you. Can I ask one last question, Sir Chris, of you? You'll be aware that there has been quite a lot of speculation about your own position. Do you expect to remain in post for the foreseeable future?
I certainly hope so. Now, you never want to read stuff in the press, as you and I expect all members of the committee know. That is the price of public life at the moment, and I suspect various members of the committee have had considerably more unpleasant things written about them. You won with the job. Media speculation is exactly what it is, and I'm sure Solly would agree with this. Our job is to get on with the job for which the taxpayer pays for, which is what I will be doing.
Yeah.
Just wanted to go back to the question that Sir John had asked around the Chinese embassy. A spokesman for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs seemed to threaten the UK last month if their super embassy planning application wasn't approved. They said, "We once again call on the UK to fulfil its obligation and honour its commitments at once. Otherwise, the consequences arising therefrom shall be borne by the UK side." I just wondered, in these conversations or meetings that you might have had when you were out there, whether they indicated what those consequences arising might be.
No, not with any clarity. They are clearly very focused on it, and I'm not surprised they've made a big investment there. It's important to them, and of course, at some level, it's important to us that they have a serious ability to represent themselves here in the UK. That's in our interests. There is, whilst the planning application is, as Chris has reminded us, completely separate from our own concerns to make sure our platform in Beijing is well supported. It's in our interest that they understand that we want that properly established and looked after as well. So I'm not surprised they're very focused on it. They did not make any specific threats along those lines, and of course, had they done so, I would simply have reminded them that this question is for the Housing Secretary and not for me.
Unless anyone has any other questions, that's it. Can I finish by thanking you both very much for coming. It's been a really important session. I hereby close the session.